Welcome onto the show, Lndsay Rhodes of Sumer Sports was at the Combine in Indianapolis. Had a great thread with a bunch of takeaways and things she learned, and we wanted to get her on to chat about the proceedings in Indy. Lindsay, you're on in D.C. with Grant and Danny. How are you?
Hi, guys. How are you? I'm doing great.
Very,
well,
very
thank
good.
you.
We appreciate you hopping aboard. So a lot of different ways I want to go with the thread and some of the things you posted. But just to start, it sounds like the consensus coming out of Indy seems to be there are players that you can like in the top 10, and Washington will get one of them at 7. But this year's players that everybody likes wouldn't necessarily be going 2, 3, 4 in a lot of years. Is that kind of where we're at?
I think so, but one of the things that I want to really highlight with that point is that it's a positional value conversation as much as it is a talent conversation. Because the draft is, I think, as much about allocating resources as it is evaluating talent. So with that in mind, the draft at the top of the draft typically is, can you get a blue chip guy at a position that there's lots of evidence can tilt your team? Like, if you're an edge rusher, if you're a quarterback, clearly, if you're a wide receiver, if you're an offensive tackle, if you're a cornerback, these are the positions that have the most impact on teams like who want to turn losses into wins. So part of the conversation about this being an underwhelming draft class is that the positions that I just mentioned don't have as much guys at the top. Like the guys who are the best at those positions are, in a lot of ways, people are like, if you put them in last year's class, they're not like the edge, for instance. There's a lot of edge names that are very, very good that I think will be able to have an impact on the field next year. At least the scouts and the people that I've talked to have said that. But they're like, but none of them are Abdul Carter, right? In terms of the offensive tackles, people are like, yeah, but there's still like, there's a couple of guys at the top, but there's like a couple of red flags or like concerns that you would attach to them. In terms of the offensive tackles, they're both of the top two guys are coming out of offenses where they ran the ball a ton, and we didn't get a chance to see them in pass pro, particularly the kind that you would need to see in the NFL. Can they develop that? What we did see wasn't necessarily like a high level of that. So you're really, really elite as a run protector as a tackle, but like your pass pro isn't necessarily elite. Plus they're right tackles as opposed to left tackles. So there's like a little bit of there's an asterisk next to them. And so then the thing that I find fascinating about that is that the best players in the draft that everybody agrees are like, that guy is so good, are the positions that have lower positional value, which is running back, which is linebacker. There's tons of great linebackers. There's good safeties. These are positions that if you were to go look at like pay scale, they're like near the bottom, and they're near the bottom for a reason. So then teams have to make a decision in this draft at the top and go, do I get somebody who is very, very good, but maybe isn't going to be like a blue chip, Pro Bowl, all-pro type guy in the league compared to his peers at one of the premium positions? Or do I just throw positional value and opportunity cost? Well, do I throw positional value out the window and go for a guy that I think will be very good in a way that I wouldn't normally in a different year? Does that make sense? Because the opportunity cost isn't as poor because you're not missing out on a blue chip at a more valuable position.
No, it makes perfect sense, Lindsay, and it's much better said than I've been trying to do for several weeks, where I've been like stabbing myself in the leg trying to come up with it as eloquently as you just did. But that's kind of the point here. At the top of the board is the best players might be Love and Downs, and that's you look at payrolls. They don't get big money. How are teams sort of balancing that at this point? Might it be kind of someone's going to be first into the breach, like in your fantasy draft, the first guy to take a tight end, and all of a sudden there's a run? Is this something that might be a new paradigm, or is it just going to be treated this year because these guys are so good? Like, how are teams viewing it?
Did we lose Lindsay? We'll work on getting her back. Lndsay Rhodes of the Sumer Sports Group and formerly of NFL Network, joining us here on Grant and Danny. One of the other things, Danny, that she had talked a lot about this week, and then I saw her tweeting about, was Fernando Mendoza. You're starting to see not only he's obviously going to go number one, but some separation between, the early part of the season where everyone kind of had him a clear-cut top quarterback. That's still going to be the case. But this unquestioned, like, he's going to be a star, And now there's a little bit of question about his tape. I saw Dan Orlovsky saying he's 8 games in and he's not impressed, basically. My issue when I watch him is the offense he runs. It's so many back shoulder throws and just like crossers on mesh stuff. It's not an NFL offense necessarily, but
it doesn't blow you away. Yeah.
Lndsay Rhodes is back. So did you hear Danny's question, Lindsay?
Just that positional value diagnosis there. How are teams viewing it?
Yeah, I think that's going to end up being the biggest question. That I'm not 100% sure that I'm settled on what is going to happen, because I think if you go through the top of the draft, I think we're all assuming Las Vegas goes with Fernando Mendoza at this point, right? And then where I think it becomes an interesting conversation is like I heard a lot of people talking about New Orleans for Jeremiah Love, that might be the place where it sort of breaks. Because the thing that you have to keep in mind also with these positional values is you want to, like a running back, you have to be able to maximize the talent. Part of the reason that the positional value is low at that position is because, and we saw this, I think, very, very clearly with Ashton Jeanty last year, there are probably people who played like fantasy football who are like, oh man, that wasn't a good pick for them in terms of his talent. It had nothing to do with his talent. All of our metrics that evaluate the actual players' play on the field shows that Ashton Jeanty was one of the best running backs in the NFL last year. We had him as an 8 on a 1 to 10 scale. He was very, very highly scored in terms of the types of things that track what he's bringing to the table. But the environment was so bad that you're not seeing production numbers. Environment meaning offensive line blocking. Like the yards before contact was like nothing, right? The quarterback, they didn't get good play there. And so you're not able to see that talent rise to the surface. So then the conversation becomes for teams, if we're going to take this swing on a position that we think is special, can we maximize him? So then you're looking at teams near the top that if you're looking for like a Jeremiah Love or, maybe differently for a safety, but like, let's just talk about Jeremiah Love for a second, the running back. You need to be a team that has a somewhat strong offensive line. You need to be a team that already has a quarterback in place. Like, we're not drafting a quarterback, well, obviously, but you don't have a bad quarterback and also this like rookie running back. You're not going to put them both in the same place. You can't maximize them that way. Are there passing game weapons so that you know that you can pass the ball effectively enough that he'll have some space to run? These are the things that you kind of need to check those boxes to say, like, can we get that guy out of him if he comes here? And I think there are a lot of teams in the top that are going to have to make those assessments. Linebacker is so specific to the way that the teams use them, which is why their positional value is low, because it's just a position that's sort of like reflective of everyone else in front of them and around them, and then how the team uses them as a piece that is sort of the last piece that you plug in terms of your priorities. You're looking at the edge. You want the front to be doing a certain thing. You're talking about coverage, and then how do the linebackers mix in? So I think that it will be a very case-by-case basis. And for Washington, I think it's a really interesting conversation because I think, in my opinion, the priority this offseason has to be upgrading the defensive side of the ball. And I actually, somebody on social media hit me up with whether or not Love should go to Washington, to which I say Washington was 8th in EPA per rush last year. So running the ball wasn't necessarily a problem. And I know part of that is because of Jaden Daniels, despite the injury and all that kind of stuff. Like, you have a different type of rushing attack there, but you got efficient running to a degree out of JCM, who's a guy who was practically free for you. Like, why would you try to upgrade that position when the defense was 31st in EPA per play? So I am looking for a lot of resources to be spent on that side of the ball this offseason. And so I think you could have a conversation about Downs. I think you could have a conversation about, Arvell Reese, or, there Reuben Bain, David Bailey. I think that there are a lot of really interesting defensive pieces at the top of the board that Washington will have to decide how they want to build out and how they view those guys relative to the other players on their board.
And obviously, free agency will answer a lot of these questions, too, with what they're able to
Absolutely.
get done before the draft. Lndsay Rhodes of Sumer Sports is with us. How's this quarterback class developing behind Fernando Mendoza? And when do you think we should hear QB2's name come off the board?
Yeah, well, so this one's a layered conversation because I think QB2 is Ty Simpson. Like, asked a bunch of people who's QB2, and he was the name that came up, but then it's always followed with a but. And a really highlighted and consistent concern, and that is the lack of starts in college. He only started 15 games. There are some easily identifiable examples of quarterbacks who also didn't start very many games in college and then turned out not to work out in the NFL. It is the not-for-long league. They do not develop starters. The teams that are going to pick a Ty Simpson in the first round or maybe even the second round, because if you think if that's a quarterback needy team, it's because they need that guy to start right away. So if you're going to use a high-end pick on him, you probably need to put him on the field right away, and I'm not sure he's ready to start. In fact, I asked Jordan Reed of ESPN point blank, he was talking about him going to the Jets at 16, and I was like, is he ready to start? And he goes, no. I'm like, why would they take him at 16 then? Like, you literally, like, if the goal is, I need you to start right now, and we all agree you're not ready to start, that's not a good fit. So this is a long-winded way of saying I wouldn't be surprised, and this is just a me personally thing, if we see Fernando Mendoza go 1, and then maybe QB2 doesn't come off the board until round 3, because if we agree that all of the quarterbacks after Fernando Mendoza, and even Fernando Mendoza to a certain degree, have, like, question marks attached to them, then I don't know that it's worth an early round pick. And that second layer of that conversation then becomes free agency, which comes first. And they're going to tell us what they think about this draft class when free agency comes around and we see Malik Willis. How much money does he go for? Does someone trade for Will Levis, who Jordan Palmer a few months ago told Sam Bruckhouse and I on the Sumer Sports Show was his next pick for the retread quarterback that we would be talking about, a la Sam Darnold? Do they go make those moves to pick up those quarterbacks this year? That'll tell us what they think of this draft class and whether or not they're planning on taking someone early.
Lindsay, where's the value? Where's the place that if some team is in kind of the sweet spot where it doesn't matter if they get, I'm making this up, wide receiver 4 versus wide receiver 7, there's not that big of a drop-off. Where do you see the perceived value here in this draft?
In terms of like where the rounds are?
Yeah, or just any position group, just maybe a kind of a sweet spot.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that I have a good answer for you, and I don't want to make one up in terms of all of the different positions. I do think wide receiver, since you brought up wide receiver, it's such a fascinating position right now because there's so many different types of wide receivers. And I think that the league is evaluating wide receiver play differently than they have in the past, and we're all kind of having to reframe our brain. And, you know, the Amon-Ra example is the one that everybody points to about, like, a team that whose wide receiver 1 looked different than what we historically have thought of wide receiver 1s as looking like. It's historically always been the X receiver on the outside, height, weight, speed, all that kind of stuff. And then here comes the Lions and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and your number 1 wide receiver, who's your primary target earner, is often operating out of the slot, moving all around. And so there are just different types of wide receivers who I think are checking different boxes, and it depends on what you don't have in your wide receiver room right now, what you need in your wide receiver room to make the offense kind of like the gravity of the defense to get the looks that you want and create the space that you want based on what your other weapons are. I'm really interested with the slot guys now, kind of in that Amon-Ra St. Brown vein. I was obsessed with Emeka last year because I could just think of so many different offenses you could plop him into. Same with Mekhi Lemon and Casey Conception this year, and then obviously there are others also. But I think that guy that can go inside out feels really interesting to me right now because of the built-in versatility. And then the assumption that a team that values that early, especially, is someone who is valuing specifically the versatility, which tells you they're going to use him in a variety of different ways, right? So, and I think there's almost like a correlation between an offense that values versatility to an offense that is versatile enough to be successful, if that makes sense. You're probably going to see a team that has a lot of play action and motion and that kind of stuff. And I think that is usually a good sign of a coaching staff that's sort of forward thinking and looking for ways to solve different problems. And I think versatility is a word that I've just said a lot here. I think that that's kind of where we are in the NFL right now. It's like positionless. It's positionless football. It's just coming up with ways to maximize the athleticism that you have on your roster. And so I think that the wide receiver position all throughout the draft is just going to be fascinating to see what different teams value and how they think that the different prospects this year check those boxes.
Well, to that point, Lindsay, you talked and wrote about the idea that oftentimes after the Super Bowl, everyone's trying to replicate what they just saw. And so now, defensively, everyone's going to try to be Seattle. Good luck with that, huh?
Yeah, I think this was a conversation that actually came up quite a bit. I like to kind of pick everyone's brains about, like, what are this year's trends? You know, we always talk about the NFL being a cyclical thing, and everyone is a copycat league. The offense is reacting to what the defense did, is reacting to what the offense did. And this year it felt like the most interesting themes were the 12 personnel stuff that we saw, not just 12, but 12, 13, a lot of heavy tight end groupings. And for people in your audience that don't know what 12 or 13 personnel is, the first number there refers to the number of running backs on the field, and the second number refers to the number of tight ends on the field. We saw a lot of heavy tight end formation looks this year. That felt like the trend. Seattle ran a lot of 12. The Rams ran a lot of 13. The goal there is specifically to make it look like you have a heavy front so that they have to respect the run. It looks like you're putting a bunch of blockers on the field so that you can run. And the Seahawks in particular, I know you asked about the defense and I shifted to the offense. I have ADD.
Relatable.
You're trying to give them a look like you're going to run, and then the Seahawks did run a ton, even when it was inefficient, so that they could pull the defense into a look that would account for that. And then when the defense gave them that look, then they threw the ball over their heads, and they did so very efficiently. So, but you asked about the defense, and I think that what we kept hearing was the Seahawks defense is obviously phenomenal in a ton of different ways, but it's not copyable because it's not so much like they were so versatile, and it changed as the season went on. And I think that the real key to the defense was Mike Macdonald's brain and his ability to pivot off of things that weren't working, or say, hey, this guy's developing in this one area, let's just use him more in that area. And so like a Nick Emanwari, who's a really rangy safety, like one of those bigger guys, it's easier for him to move around the field in a bunch of different ways that actually are good against 12 and 13, by the way, because of his size and his specific skill set. And Caleb Downs is a safety this year, for instance, that is not like that. And I think a lot of people misunderstood when I said in this thread, Caleb Downs is not Nick Emanwari. I'm not saying he's not as good as Nick Emanwari. I'm saying he's differently good than Nick Emanwari. Like, he's just a differently special safety. So if you're thinking, let's go do what the Seahawks did and get Caleb Downs to be our Nick Emanwari, that's just not the right way to go about it. It's like Nick Emanwari is as similar to, like Troy Polamalu. Like it's like they play different positions, right? They're just so differently skilled. And so, there are some guys that check the box of like the Nick Emanwari, Kyle Hamilton type in this draft, but they're not necessarily Caleb Downs. This is a very long-winded way. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here. I think Mike Macdonald is a really good coach, and the ability to assess the players on his roster is the thing that you really want to copy if you're trying to copy them. It's the ability to be nimble and to pivot and to be flexible and not try to make a player do the thing that your scheme dictates. Is to adjust your scheme to the talent that you have.
Lindsay, awesome with us. Have a great weekend. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Be good. Lndsay Rhodes, check her out at Sumer Sports. Does a great job covering the league. And fresh back from Indianapolis. A lot of good information from her time at the Combine.